And they are the changes we can make to help restore your normal immune system function, improve skin conditions, improve autoimmune diseases, and the NHS will tell you none of this. So eczema, psoriasis, topical steroid withdrawal, chronic conditions, autoimmune conditions, what do they all have in common? What's the common thing they share? The first thing I always ask you to understand is it's the immune system that is causing the majority of the symptoms. Okay, so not the root causes. We can trace most of it back to the immune system. It's not being fed the correct information to function properly. So in some of the other videos, I'll talk about things like Th2, which is the T helper cell that's commonly associated with atopic dermatitis and those allergic atopic march kind of conditions like asthma, food sensitivities, allergic rhinitis, hay fever, those kinds of things. So knowing that it's the immune system, what are we going to do? How do we control the immune system? Well, we need to give it the right information, and then it pretty much sorts itself out. And I've helped hundreds of people go through this process, and I use something called the Core 4 to guide people through what's going on, and I'll teach as I go. So the first thing in the Core 4 is the diet. Now, why diet? Because this is the information that we're giving to the body. It's not just nutrients, it's information. There is a field called epigenetics. I suggest you guys check it out. And epigenetics tells us that based on your genome, okay, and your DNA, it will change which genes are expressed. So if you have a gene that codes for a particular illness and the doctor says, it's hereditary, sorry, there's nothing we can do. Actually, by changing diet, lifestyle, stress, things like that, I'm going to run you through, you can change which genes are turned on and which ones are turned off during replication and use. So you have control over whether your DNA becomes your destiny or not by actually taking some action over in the left-hand side. So diet has a huge influence on epigenetics. I really suggest you guys check that out. But the first thing we'll look at is the diet. So we're looking for the presence of inflammatory foods. Inflammatory foods, notice immune system, inflammation, these two things come hand in hand. Second thing is reaction foods. Now this is really interesting. When you talk about a reaction food, it's what has the immune system learnt about this food that says, oh, I need to now create an inflammatory response. The body, as I say, doesn't just wake up one day and say, hey, do you know who I hate now? I hate eggs, you can't eat them anymore. Ha! What's actually happening here, well, eggs, there are two reasons why. But what's actually happened here is the immune system is a learning machine. It's not just static. So what happens normally is, again, to the gut barrier, a normal healthy gut barrier will look something like this amazing artistic work here. And your poop is in here and the food, and your bloodstream is in here, and that goes off to the liver. Now, when you're eating this food, it's only being absorbed through proper channels, so the immune system can actually learn about the proteins and things that you're eating. So it has cells that will do some reconnaissance and do some looking at what you've actually eaten so it can learn about it. Similar to the dendritic cells, they will reach through, grab a protein, and grab it back and pull it back through the gut lining, show it to the rest of the immune system and say, hey, can we just take a look at this? Is this something that we need to be concerned about? It's a learning machine. Now, if these proteins are introduced to the immune system in a way that triggers it or a way that's uncontrolled and unregulated, in the case of intestinal hyperpermeability, you know it as leaky gut, which the NHS doesn't recognize, by the way. They deleted the page a couple of years ago on the website. The proteins are now moving straight through into the bloodstream. So all of a sudden, the immune system has this onslaught of foreign proteins that do not belong to your body entering through one of your body barriers. Okay? This is also true in the skin barriers. When we're talking about skin conditions, there are studies that show sensitization to peanuts can occur through the skin barrier. So in a very similar way, if this is the skin barrier here, if we have dryness or the start of atopic dermatitis and we start to get a breakdown in this skin barrier function, we know that food proteins making their way through here can cause those sensitization events to happen, with the dendritic cells picking up these proteins, handing them over to the rest of the immune system, causing that IgE cascade. The body will only produce an IgE response if it's learned that it's something it needs to react to. So it's been chronically exposed to it, or it's had a sensitization event through one of the body barriers. And some people will notice this, if they have very sensitive skin, it's because of the breakdown in the skin barrier, not because all of a sudden they woke up one day and they're allergic to their favorite perfume. So that's when we talk about reaction foods. And when you go and see the immunology department, they will say, oh, you need to be exposed to a tiny amount of these proteins so the immune system can learn. False, if the body barriers are still broken down. So if they're still broken down, you will eat a little bit of peanut and then it will go through and through the gut lining and into the bloodstream and you'll flare up. Their premise is not taking into account these leaky body barriers and also the immune system's normal learning process. So what they have to do is heal and seal the gut and the skin, hopefully, then they can introduce these foods to you. Then we'll go back to this stage of learning, which is where the immune system can actually tolerate these foods again. That's why a lot of people in the practice, once we've excluded these foods to begin with, We heal and seal the gut lining, do all the liver work and the detox and all that good stuff. Then we bring these foods back in, and lo and behold, most of them can eat them again with no flare-ups and no problem. So yes, it can be done. Third thing is nutrition density. Nutrition density. Your body is a box of Lego, and if we don't have the right building blocks in the box, the body is going to struggle to go through the majority of its processes. It burns through nutrients. It uses nutrients as part of its process. It uses minerals if we're getting them in the right ratios. So nutrition density, very often with the diet, will shift away from lots of carbohydrate foods and getting lots of energy over to lower carbohydrate foods, lots of protein and healthy fats, some carbohydrates, but from healthy sources, not from starchy foods like rice or oats and grains. We'll come away from that because guess what? Your body doesn't need starch and it changes the microbiome. And if you want to look into that further, just have a look at what happens to cattle when they're mass fed these types of grains. All right, there's a big problem with the GI tract. They get bloating because you're starting to breed different microbes that, guess what? They prefer the starch. They prefer those long chain sugars rather than the bioavailable non-soluble fiber. So that's what we do with the diet. So it's not a case of when you go and get your allergy test done, and I know loads of people say, and they email me and say, oh, should I go get an allergy test? This popped up, what's going on here? An allergy test result is a list of proteins that have made their way through one of the body barriers in an incorrect fashion, and the immune system has trained itself on those. All right, it's not something that you just woke up one day and you suddenly can't have it anymore. It's because the immune system has learnt falsely that it's something it can't tolerate because the body barriers have been broken down and it's moved through. So when you do go and get an allergy test done, very often you'll pop up with either a load of things or very few things. And so it can be really, really confusing what's actually going on there. So just remember, whenever we're talking about allergies and stuff, the immune system can be retrained. So bringing the microbiome up a little bit early is there's something called the old friends hypothesis, which is that all the microbes that we've kind of grown up with through the course of human evolution, not one generation speaking, I'm talking about human evolution over a long period of time, the old friends hypothesis says that we have lost a lot of the microbial diversity and those specific species that help to regulate our immune response to different foods. Right, and there's a great case on this to do with helminths, which are tiny little worms, but actually they proved that they were healthy. We think of worms as like being really bad, really terrible, but actually, if you look at a good quality piece of soil on the outside in a farmland, for example, the quality of the soil can be judged by how many earthworms there are in a cubic meter. Right, so worms and soil do go together. We talk about the microbiome being the soil of the body of which your roots are planted in. So that's a little bit on the nutrition density, and we've spoken about the diet. So next thing is the biomes. Let's go there. Now, the biomes, I hit on this all the time, and I think it's still one of the massive areas that we can learn a lot from and do a lot of research into because it's so important for normal function of the body. So what we're looking for here is dysbiosis, which is a kind of catch-all term for explaining an imbalance between the good microbes, the bad microbes, and there is pathogenic dysbiosis, which is where we have a presence of a pathogenic type of microbe, a really bad microbe, that has overgrown within the gut, or we have insufficiency dysbiosis, which is for some reason, and we'll come to that, your good microbes, which help to break down non-soluble fiber into short-chain fatty acids and feed the gut lining. They help to produce neurotransmitters. They look after your gut. Those guys have been wiped out or have been massively crunched in number. All right, so that's insufficiency dysbiosis. So there are different types, and what we're looking for here is bowel function is a really good indicator for this. So stool type, frequency, smell, does it float, does it sink? Is there any blood or mucus in the stool? All of these things can give us an indicator for what's going on with the microbiome. If you want the data on it, you get a GI mapping test, although for a lot of people, it's not actually relevant because the reset process we take people through is enough to sort out most of the issues with the gut. So dysbiosis, not only in the gut biome, but also on the skin. And what we're talking about when we talk about biomes, one of the keys here is diversity. When we lose diversity, things start to go wrong. One population will start to overgrow. Okay, so really diversity. You'll see this in skin conditions with Staphylococcus overgrowth. So Staphylococcus is a natural member of the skin microbiome. It comes with a starter kit. However, if we lose microbial diversity on the skin, and now there's lots of space and maybe the pH balance of the skin is shifted in preference of Staphylococcus, it's like, right, off we go, let's start breeding. And that's where we get these Staphylococcus blooms from and secondary infections and skin conditions. So what's the solution to the dysbiosis? Well, we need to remove the microbes that shouldn't be there, replace the ones who should be there, these commensal microbes, not just Bifidobacterium and Lactobacillus. I'm talking about broad spectrum replacement. All right, and then once they're back in there, we need to give them the things that they eat, which these commensal microbes that ferment it into short-chain fatty acids will eat, Non-soluble fiber, that's correct. However, the carnivore guys, they kind of get away with this because they're heavy on the butter. Butter is very high in butyrate, and butyrate is what you would be getting if you were eating non-soluble fiber, and the microbes were fermenting that into short-chain fatty acids, one of which is butyrate. That's why the carnivore guys can get away with it and not eating any fiber. I'm not saying over-index on the fiber. I'm not saying don't have any. I'm saying there's a moderate amount. Again, diversity is the spice of life. Diversity on the plate, diversity in the gut, diversity on the skin, diversity in pursuits of life. So next is stress. Now this one jumped in my priorities. It used to be toxins, then stress. But actually, since all the data we've been getting back on the stress and the TSW work and the hair tissue mineral analysis we've been doing, it's been like, okay, you can't ignore the fact that stress is a higher priority than the detox stuff. Plus, interestingly, you can't detox the body unless all your minerals are sorted out. For example, if it turns out you have lead exposure, so you have a heavy metal burden, you can't pull the lead out unless you've got something to replace it with. This is called ionic mimicry, which is where lead can actually compete for some of your other minerals that should be in that place. Lead can actually fit that gap. So instead, we need to give the body the minerals it needs so that it can knock the lead out, detox that, and then replace it with whichever mineral that we need. And that's called ionic mimicry. It's fantastic. So for stress, what we're looking for here is HPA axis function. So HPA is hypothalamic pituitary adrenal. All right, so your adrenals are two little triangles on top of your kidneys. They regulate a lot of things in the body. They produce cortisol. They're responsible for a lot of other hormone manufacture. And also, they are responsible for your sodium and your potassium balance because they sit on top of the kidneys, right? So they're filtering that out. They're controlling how much is put into the urine and how much is taken out. So your HPA axis is your stress axis. This is the one that can help you move into fight and flight if you experience a stressful situation, or it's the one that can help move you into rest and digest, which is that parasympathetic nervous state, that vagus nerve that's going to help relax you and move you back into rest and digest. So by checking the stresses on the body, work life, home life, relationships, what's currently going on, how are you feeling about things, is life going the way that you want, we can get a really good benchmark for that HPA axis function. Like, do you easily get stressed, butterflies in the stomach, start feeling nauseous, or in some cases, especially TSW guys, when you are exposed to a stressful situation where you then start to have a flare up or you then start to scratch. This is an indicator that HPA axis may be dysfunctional, and a lot of the time it's because of the adrenal glands. So if you are working with anyone on the TSW side of things, or you know any health professionals who are working on that and doing studies, have them take a look into the adrenal component of TSW. I know a lot of people say, oh, it's a skin condition, it's chemical burns. In my opinion, the data that I have says it's not just a skin issue. And the reason I'm so strong with that is because every single hair tissue mineral analysis test that I've done for TSW sufferers has come back with extremely low sodium, and very often, most of them extremely low potassium, right? That tells me there's something going on. I mean, if you look into hair tissue mineral balancing, you can see that some of these relationships with the minerals indicate adrenal fatigue or adrenal burnout or extreme stress, especially when it's accompanied with something called a calcium shell, which is where your calcium's really high, sodium's low, potassium's low. This is the calcium shell. It's the extreme stress state where the body starts to pull calcium out of the bones as a way to buffer the blood pH. This is really important with the blood test as well. When you go and get a blood test, the blood stream is homeostatic, which means your body's constantly fighting to keep that blood within range. When we get the hair test, it's completely different. Right, that's benchmarks, absolute benchmarks. So HPA axis, really important. And then toxins, again, with the detox stuff, please, if you watch any of the videos after this by anyone else, don't let them put you on a detox protocol until the gut work is done and you've balanced out the minerals, because you'll cause more problems. All right, so all these like parasite cleanses and stuff, who told you you had a parasite? Like, if you look at the data on how many people actually have a parasite, unless you're living in like Malaysia eating street food with your bare hands, it's not that often that we're going to see these parasites. It's not what social media would have you believe. I'm not saying you don't have parasites. Some people do. But if you go through a parasite detox, actually a lot of these parasites are actually quite useful for our body and the part of that microbiome diversity. They're not always the root of the problem. So just go careful when you start talking about doing detox. Something that's good is red light therapy. For some people, works for some people. Sauna. Obviously, with the skin guys, we can't get them doing that sauna therapy until their skin has recovered quite significantly. And a great gentle binder that I like to use is chlorella. Okay, and whenever we talk about detoxing, if you're going through a gut reset process and you have quite bad gastrointestinal dysbiosis, sometimes we'll also take a binder so that as microbes die off and they release things into the gut lumen, we want to bind those things so that they can be excreted properly. But again, these are the steps that we will use. However, we don't know which ones you're dealing with, what's the first action to take. But all of these things can contribute towards chronic and autoimmune conditions and skin conditions. Obviously, I include that. But I just wanted to hammer home the fact that it's not just skin conditions. It's like most chronic and autoimmune conditions can be improved by using this.